our cultural assumption is that we should pocket the unearned equity that comes from market lift and put it in our pockets. That has been our cultural domain. And I think all of us understand that. It's the way we think. So housing has moved from a need to a commodity, right? And anyway, that's a long discussion we won't necessarily get into tonight. But that's a pretty astounding kinds of, so to kind of just put the problem in context, I think that, wrong button, it works. So what does a community land trust do in relationship to this kind of problem? Okay, so one of the reasons we're organizing in Victoria on a multi-stakeholder basis is it takes multiple stakeholders to come to an agreement or not about whether or not they want to shift the dynamic into what we call a process of reclaiming the commons. That is, in the private property system, we have, and I'm not against private property per se, but in the private property system, it's become a speculative exercise. This is not going to deal with people at low and moderate and even middle incomes in some community in terms of their ability to live in a reasonable way. So the idea is to create a multi-stakeholder community or governance model that takes the land out of the market and puts it under a governance framework and a legal title framework that says this land has a covenant on it. The covenant on this land is that, from a housing point of view in this case, we will preserve affordability in perpetuity for people who cannot afford otherwise to live in a way that expresses some respect for human dignity and basic needs, okay? Now, there's a home ownership option. You can still have a private dimension in terms of this, which is you take the land out, but you lease it back on a long-term basis to somebody that can own their house. And then you put a covenant on it, or you put a rule in place that essentially says, you can own this house, you do own this house, but part of the deal here is you can only earn a limited equity return based on preserving the value of community benefit realized in this case through housing to have it affordable in perpetuity. Right? And for rental ownership, it can also be rental, but as you may know, there's a lot of rental properties that are also subject to speculation. So people also get edged out of the rental market because of the speculative nature of how we've come to think about the way in which we deal with property and maximizing return. So it can be home ownership, it can be rental, and it, in both cases, can have some generative effects based on now some significant experience in the United States. So, just to kind of explain the basic concept a little bit more, conventional system, as I've already said, is essentially buy in the right location, play the market, sell, retire, or if you're younger, sell and move up, right? That's the pattern. We all know that. Nothing new in that. But what the CLT, as I've already said, separates the ownership of the land from the ownership of the building. So it's what we would call dynamic property rights or duplex ownership structure, right? Private and common. Okay? Okay. So what the CLT does is it leases, it has the deed and it leases the land to the homeowner. What it has in that lease, there's a covenant, and there's other ways of doing this, but I won't go into that right now. The lease has inside of it a covenant that basically says, you own this house, you're leasing this land, But our mission as a community is to create a housing stock that's affordable in perpetuity for low and moderate and middle income people, right? And in return, you only have a limited equity return. So that's essentially what this whole system does. It's kind of not the best graphic in terms of proportions, but you can see that the Community Land Trust, the land value is flattened because it's out of the market. The house value can still go up based on people's investment in improvements and a limited equity return, all geared, to preserving affordability. Whereas, of course, in the kind of normal real estate market, there's no controls on it. So what I want to do is just show you kind of the broader impact of this. So we've got a history now. Burlington, Vermont is one of the longest standing community land trusts in the United States. It's a small town. It's the capital of Vermont, but there's only like 50,000 people, right? Okay, so what they've done is I don't know, any of you know the name Bernie Sanders by any chance? So Bernie Sanders is the only independent senator in the United States. And he was an independent congressman, but he was the mayor of Burlington. And they had all these people coming. It's like Salt Spring Island. All these people coming to Vermont, right? From New York and so on and so forth. And the prices were going up. People who lived there couldn't afford to live there anymore. The students were having a hard time. It's university town. So what happened is they said, well, we'll try rent controls. Well, rent controls didn't work. So they gave this new land trust $200,000, right? And they started to collaborate in terms of acquiring land and being able to put them under this system. And so their interest at that time was for the kind of low income and moderate income people. And within the state of Vermont, they had a subsidy system to some extent. I'm not going to get into all of that. But they take the subsidy and then they took a land tenure format, community land trust, and they were able to start building both rental and ownership options for people. And low-income households, what it says here at the bottom, earn 50 to 80% of the area median income. Now what the area median income, so if the area median income in this neighborhood, let's say was $40,000, well 50% of the area median income, what it says there, would be 20. 80% would be 35, right? So low-income households, if that were the income, would be considered 50 to 80%. Okay, so I need to give you that background just to show you the impact. We think of housing always going up in price. What I'm going to show you is in 25 years, affordability has increased. Not decreased, it's increased. So, when they started in 1984, they were at 60, whatever that is, 2% of the area median income, right? So if it were 40 grand, it would be whatever 62% of that is. You can do the math, okay?
That was the average housing cost?
Pardon?
That was the average housing cost? Was that 60%?
No, I'm saying that was affordable. What they were doing was affordable for people that were making that much money, okay? Is that clear?
Yeah, so 62%
62%
of the income.
of that median income. The median income is the middle income of high and low within that population, okay?
Right.
It was affordable.
So if it were 40,000, it would be 62% of 40,000, which would be somewhere around 28 or...
24,000.
I was hoping there was somebody like you in the room. But look what happens. In 2002, it's actually gone down. In fact, more people can afford it than could afford it earlier. And if you go to 2009, you're down to 52%. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
It has increased the affordability, and this relates to the rental housing market and to the owner-occupied housing.
Like the 2009 housing crash in the States. Where the other one was.
Well, that's true. That may be a factor, but the overall, you can see the trend line, right?
Yeah, from 1984 to 2009, 2002, house prices throughout the United States are
Absolutely.
generally going up.
You're absolutely right, and you'll be really interested in the next slide. Because this slide, which is a bit, let me just go here. So you remember subprime mortgage, that's the crisis in 1980. You know, subprime mortgages were essentially brokers out there selling mortgages to people that couldn't afford it, right? And they would then package it up like in the States, the countrywide mortgages, and they'd sell them off. They'd get the commission as a broker. They'd put it in their pocket. Countrywide mortgages would sell it off to the banks or to the Lehman Brothers, right? Then they'd package it up and they would get and pay, right? The Standard & Poor's, the rating agencies, to get their AAA ratings. They put it on the international market and they'd sell them, and it was nothing but a big Ponzi scheme. Because those people couldn't afford it in the first place, but the whole system was a speculative system in terms of the financial markets, which is, you know, a whole other discussion I'm not going to get into tonight. But look at what happens. Here is, in terms of seriously delinquent or in the foreclosure process, right? This is the subprime mortgage that I just told you about. That's how many people. There's millions and millions of people in the States that actually exited their homes. I can tell you very personal stories about this. This is the normal market, right? The kind of regular mortgage market. This is how many were seriously delinquent inside community land trusts. This is how many were in a foreclosure process. Why is that? Isn't that interesting? Why are municipalities in the United States so interested in community land trusts? You know how much it costs a municipality to go through the process of eviction and foreclosure and all this kind of, it's huge impact from an economic standpoint on the municipality. Many municipalities in the United States actually provide grants in various types of means to try and create greater affordability, because this is a problem in many, many cities in the United States. Atlanta, Chicago, Irvine, California. You go on and on. I could tell you lots of stories. They're seen, honest to God. Look at these guys. They're the ones that are able to preserve affordability over time. So you got this public policy shift, which is now even accelerating the process. So it's a very interesting evidence base when you think about why this alternative land tenure model, which is absolutely counterpoint to the ideological bias that we've often lived within.
Because it's taking out the profit.
It's taking out the profit of those people that have the capital that are able to, in fact, benefit from it. But most of us, you know, most people in Canada and the United States, they can't afford a friggin' doorknob. You know, never mind, you know, so this is not for the majority. This is you have to have money to make money in this context. I mean, we're talking. One of the guys on the Affordable Housing Task Force said, I really got along with well, but we thought like hell. He was chair of a $90 billion real estate firm, and he thought about affordable housing as charity. You know, it's just like, give me a break, buddy. You know. Well, anyway, I won that one. He lost. Anyway, so you get the idea, at least from a municipal government point of view, you can see, right? And this is where we got some traction in Vancouver, is that we are just on the edge of a deal being done where one piece of land in a land trust that the Cooperative Housing Federation has is being combined with three parcels of land that the municipal government has, long-term 99-year lease into the land trust, and we got a 350 unit development that potentially is going to get locked into this kind of model, which would be the biggest breakthrough in the Canadian context. So, you know, but there's a whole series of public benefits from the citizen to the government, but it is an absolute mind shift, right? You got to see the world differently, like it's a different landscape. But the problem is if we don't start to look at our options differently, given the challenges we face, of which this is just one, we're not going to even begin to see what we need to navigate to create solutions. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I want to introduce you to one other piece, okay? And then this is an adaptation. So it has the community land trust built into it here. It owns the land title. And it may come by purchase or donation, or it may come by virtue of a grant from a municipal government. So the community land trust holds the land. Now, this came out of the UK, and the people that developed this, one of them being the co-author of the book that I wrote, one being the guy who's the head of the International Cooperative Association Housing Council, who used to be the head of the UK Co-op Council. They were trying to say, how do we do this in an urban area? Because land costs are higher in an urban area, right? Like they got real traction in the rural areas, but how do we do this? And so they took a model from Sweden. The Sweden model, 30% of the housing in Sweden is through tenant cooperatives. That is, the tenants own the cooperative owns the housing, and the tenants lease, right? The problem is they never had a community land trust tenure, and what's happened is they gentrified the model, and now it's really well-off people that can afford to live in these wonderful housing cooperatives because there was no way of dealing with the affordability question over time. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so they have a tenants cooperative, right? And they own the land. Or they don't own, sorry, they don't own the land. CLT owns the land. They own the building, and they hold the corporate mortgage, right? So they do the lending with the bank. And then the individual members, right, they lease from the cooperative on a lease geared to income basis. So there's a provision for equity between people who are living at different income levels. So if you think of 35% of your income goes to paying the lease, you know, if you're making $100,000 a year, you're making $18,000 a year, big difference, right? But you get a cross subsidy built into the situation. But the difference, you know, in Canada, our whole system was built on a rental co-op basis because CMHC was great. I mean, it was a great program. Built a lot of co-op housing. It's been very good, but it's in trouble now. This allows a limited equity ownership and return. So I'm going to just show you how that works.
And we'll wrap up in say 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's pretty good. All right. So if you just take a look here, and I know people love numbers. So this is all in pounds. So this is kind of, so you can see, you know, if you're looking at 14,000, you're looking at kind of 1.5, 1.6 times that. That's the lower number here. You go to the broader 32, you're looking at 55, you know, 1,000, something like that. But they're paying 35% of their income, right, in. And they have to pay, you know, revenue and management maintenance. It's like a strata fee almost, right? Which you see under management maintenance service costs. Wrong damn buttons. So people, if you look at the one on the far left here, you see they're paying 319 pounds versus 850 pounds over on the right there, right? So you can see there's some equity built into that, and they're all contributing to the mortgage at different levels. And this shows up in shares that they get. So based on the number, the amount that they pay into the mortgage, people who are low income pay less. They also pay a much lower lease. And they still, this number here, right, total equity shares, that is worth that much after 10 years. So they get a whole year of income, if you will, And it's still all geared to maintain equitable and affordable rates over time. You're still way below market, right? That's the assumption. So it's a very, very interesting way of thinking about, because it's got some advantages. There's a corporate mortgage, it's lower, you can negotiate lower interest rates for the corporate mortgage.
Like corporate mortgage, you need one mortgage for
The tenant cooperative holds the
You
mortgage.
don't have individual.
And if you think of an individual, every time you sell a house or buy it, how much does it cost you? At least 6 or 7%. When you look at all the costs, those are gone. There's a whole variety of different ways in which you're reducing.
And you could move from one unit to another unit. because
could
it's a
move
matter
from
of
one
your
unit to
shares, so
another
it's not
unit.
attached to that exact unit if your family size changes over time through life.
Yeah, so it's got some really interesting applications in a variety of different, you can get mixed income, mixed housing, mixed ownership. You can have seniors. It's very interesting for seniors in our demographic. I can say R about that. You know, who are thinking about how do you do this, right? And you may be in a property. Anyway, there's lots of different. So anyway, at the end of the day, so this gives security of tenure. If you put more money in, you've got preservation of existing equity, but it's all geared to creating access points for people moderate. This is not going to work for the really, really low income people because you still need the subsidy. But for communities like this, where you're really talking about labor force or workforce, you know, related housing access, there's a lot of people that are struggling, paying 50% or more of their income in the housing that are fully employed, and it's just a grind, right? Still, you can get a limited return on invested equity. If you're in the ownership side, you get some participation in governance, and you get community-wide benefit. And you may see other kinds of potential. So, I'm done.